Wrestling, another podcast about it. These are the ramblings of a wrestling fan. My mission, to talk to wrestling personalities and other fans, to seek out new promotions and podcasts, to talk about wrestling like a lot of people before me.
Welcome to Wrestling with the MMA. I am Jeremy, and today I am joined by JayCal, one of the longest-running NWA supporters that I know. Welcomed me into the NWA family whenever I first came around. And how are you doing today, Jay?
Swell. I'm doing
swell. Well, for those that aren't in the know, the reason why this started out with me laughing my ass off was because we've just sat here and bullshitted for about the past 25 minutes or so, and we weren't recording.
And that's on me.
We're professionals. I see the live thing up in the corner. I see it every Wednesday whenever I'm on with the Alliance, with the other Alliance guys. I should have noticed it, and I didn't notice it. So, yeah, but we're professionals.
You're the professional. I'm Rick Amateur, but let's go, man. Thank you for having me on. I did get to check the last podcast out. You told me his name, and I forgot it again, but the last, help me out.
Last Minute Wrestling Podcast with Frank Mandolini.
And Frank and you had some great conversations. I really enjoyed that. You guys had a great chat, and I hope we can have a great chat today. Where's the dumpster fire graphic?
Tim has it.
Yeah. So, yeah,
I love that graphic.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for being on, man. I really appreciate it. So your journey to the NWA, what was the impetus for this? What got you into wrestling?
Ooh, you change it up on me. What got me into wrestling? Having a big brother is what got me into wrestling.
Okay.
I was the baby of the family, and my brother was a big fan of the WWF back then, and so we would watch Saturday mornings, and of course I grew up with Hulk Hogan and rock and roll wrestling. I mean, we were about the same age, so I'm sure you remember like the hype around WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 2, and what was her name? Wendy Richter and Cyndi Lauper and Captain Lou Albano and the whole MTV crossover and all that stuff. And yeah, I mean that's what got me into wrestling, but it was a long path to get me to where I am today.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Cyndi Lauper growing up. I was a big punk rock kid, so yeah.
You're still a big punk rock kid.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It shocked me whenever I found out that Lars Friedrichsen was a big wrestling fan from Rancid. I was really stoked for that.
Well, it makes sense, and not that he's my favorite guy, but to quote the owner of the NWA and also also a rock star, that wrestling is like the last punk rock. I mean, it's like there's not very much media out there that allows you to just be rebellious the way that punk rock music did or like wrestling does.
Right.
So I guess it connects.
So in our earlier conversation before this, we had talked about your journey to the NWA and how you came across them with your cable box and all that. What was it that got you so enthralled into the NWA as opposed to WWF, WWE as we know it now?
That's a good question. So, like, growing up again, WWF house, stumbled across the NWA at a young age, probably like 8 or 9, and I guess this would be like 87, 88. And it was just something different, right? Because like for the when I'm 5 years old, I'm watching pro wrestling and I'm watching Hulk Hogan and Brutus Beefcake and Greg the Hammer Valentine, but then seeing just different characters and seeing like who's this Ric Flair guy and wow, he wrestles so much different than this Hulk Hogan guy, and they both say that they're world champions, and it was just a styles clash, and I think the WWF is meant for, especially in the 80s, it was meant for kids. It was supposed to be like, hey, check this out. These are real life superheroes. But then when you watch, the NWA, on TBS, like you're seeing like fighters. You're seeing guys who are like beating each other up.
Look
And I
like
think
our
that
dads and stuff.
yeah, like when I looked at Arn Anderson, I'm like, that could be my dad,
Yeah.
Like he didn't look like Hulk Hogan, but you didn't want to piss off Arn Anderson or Ole Anderson or Tully Blanchard or any of those guys. And they didn't look like, not to say that they didn't have physiques. I mean, Ric Flair, we don't ever look at Ric Flair as a body guy, but that guy was built. In the 80s, he was built.
Yeah.
But like not in the same way that Hulk Hogan was built or Paul Orndorff. Well, I mean, Paul Orndorff was in both, but you know what I'm saying? Like these guys were built like bodybuilders. These guys were built like men.
Yeah.
So when you started watching NWA Saturday nights, World Championship Wrestling, whatever you want to call it, the wrestling was just different and it was more enjoyable to me. I've always liked tag team wrestling, so you had a litany of tag team wrestlers. Of course the Road Warriors were a huge inspiration for me. I loved Animal, loved Hawk, loved the face paint, loved the Black Sabbath, Iron Man. All of that was don't forget the shoulder pads too. All of that was just so like. It's funny because we're talking about cartoony. It was very cartoony, but in a cool way. And then you had the Midnight Express, who had that really badass theme music, and then you had Beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stanley. That was my Midnight Express. Jim Cornette, the loudmouth. He had Big Bubba Rogers in the back, he had the tennis racket. Stan Lane, good looking dude. Beautiful Bobby, excellent wrestler. You're just like, man, these guys are cool to watch. And you got Rock and Roll Express, the girls going crazy for them whenever they come out. You had Arn and Tully. Like I said, I always thought Arn reminded me of my dad. So seeing like this guy, Tully Blanchard, and my dad in the ring, it was like, yeah, man, it was just a different vibe, and it wasn't like, you turn on the WWF and you've got like, the Rockers, which I always thought was a ripoff the Rock and Roll Express. You've got, 80s tag teams. Tito Santana, Rick Martel. You had Dino Bravo and Greg the Hammer Valentine, the British Bulldogs. I mean, it was just a different kind of animal. And, Heart Foundation. But yeah, it wasn't at that point like I picked one or the other. I picked them both. Like every Saturday at the 3:05 on the West Coast, I was watching Saturday night. At 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays, I'm watching, Superstars or WWF All American, whatever it was called. I watched as much wrestling as I could. I even watched Glow Wrestling. I watched everything I could. At one point we would even cross over to the Telemundo and would watch the Lucha Libre. So I mean, I did every wrestling I can consume. I mean, I'd come home from school and my brother would record AWA on ESPN. We'd watch that. Later it would be Global Wrestling. We'd watch that. Like I was not choosy. I would watch all of the wrestling.
CNS, I'm basically the same way. There's very little wrestling that I don't sit down and watch, and it's basically just because it just doesn't fit into my wheelhouse of like nothing against AEW or anything, but it's not my cup of tea. I'm not gonna sit here and bash it or anything. It's just not my cup of tea. They got a lot of great talent on there, but I'm not gonna. There's other things I can watch. GCW is another one. I know that our junior heavyweight champion, Kerry Morton, has been spending a lot of time over there and showing a different side of himself over there, which I really want him to do in the NWA, but
it's coming.
Oh God, I'm so ready. I'm so ready, bro.
Have you seen some of Kerry's tweets on Twitter lately?
Yes.
I joked about it today on the pre-party, but I was mentioning how like what happened to Kerry when he came back from Mexico. He's a different guy, but like it kind of fits the timeline. Like he's out there, man. Like Game Changer really kind of opened up this window, and the Kerry Morton we're seeing, man, he's fun. I want more of that.
Yeah, definitely. So we jump to the formation of the Alliance blog and how did that all come about? What brought that about for you?
So, like many, the Alliance blog predates YouTube, which I think is pretty cool, but also like kind of sad at the same time.
Oh
Um,
no, not at all, bro.
Wrestling, the same the same passion I had as a kid about wrestling is kind of similar today. And what kind of launched the Alliance blog was I was looking for wrestling and I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And because there wasn't a YouTube, and even then, like, just because a wrestling promotion had a YouTube didn't mean you'd get current matches.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no real way to follow the NWA. And there's a whole long story, but basically watching Dan Severn enter the octagon with the 10 pounds of gold reinvigorated my desire to see the NWA. That flame would be further stoked when the NWA's Japanese promotion 01 had a partnership with my local indie in Southern California, UPW. I was already starting to write for SoCal Uncensored, which believe it or not, has been around since 2001. So
Yep.
they're probably one of the longest standing pro wrestling websites, period. I started writing for them probably like in 2003. But like I was reporting on the shows, like I would post the results in the message board. If I took pictures, I'd upload them and put them on the website. I was a very active member on that page. And so I kept saying to myself, man, I wish there was a way. I wish there was a SoCal Uncensored for the NWA, because the SoCal Uncensored would cover every wrestling promotion in California, Southern California,
Yeah.
but there was nobody covering the NWA because NWA Tri-State wasn't getting its results to PWI. Dave Meltzer wasn't talking about what was happening in NWA Southwest, and although people were talking about it. The NWA had a message board. Hell, I was a moderator on there. People were talking about it, but there was no like one uniform place where people could go to follow the NWA. So I had a job that still have the job. It has a lot of downtime, a ton of downtime. So I'm sitting on a computer and I thought, well, what if I started just blogging about this? What if I started doing this? And so I started off, honestly, I was trying to come up with a clever name. And there was a website called the Death Valley Driver. I don't even know if that still exists, but there was a message board, the DVDR, Death Valley Driver. And I was like, well, I'm going to come up with a name like that too. And so I called mine the Abdominal Stretch. It didn't last very long. And then I started on Google's blogger, and I started off with the National Wrestling Alliance fan site, blogger.com. And so I started compiling what was happening in the NWA. And then what really kind of triggered it to really get going was in 2007 when Impact Wrestling and the NWA ended their 5-year licensing agreement. And basically the titles were coming back to the NWA. This was huge news.
Yeah.
Samoa Joe Kurt Angle and Christian were going to be wrestling for the 10 pounds of gold. And before the match happened, the NWA withdrew their sanctioning of Impact. So that's big, like that's crazy. And I had already developed a lot of these connections because Dave Marquez in California, I had a very close relationship with him. I had started talking to a lot of the promoters via the message board. I was a moderator, so they already kind of respected me and would talk to me. So I had sources. I knew where the information was coming from. So I started compiling it, writing about it. And when they announced the title tournament, you couldn't go and find where these results were happening. So I would reach out to the promoter. Hey, what were the results of the show? We'll put it on the website. And and we started doing that. And that was the real genesis of the Alliance blog, which, it's actually alliance-wrestling.com. The reason why my socials are the Alliance blog is because you couldn't fit alliance-wrestling.com as a Twitter handle. So it all just became the Alliance blog.
And so since you've been with the Alliance blog, since you started this and everything, it's taken you to quite a few places around the world, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, So back in my younger years, when my wife was then my girlfriend, the first out of town wrestling show we went to was actually we went to Las Vegas, and we got to go to an NWA show. It was an NWA Pro Wrestling Summit. It was a mixture between Lucha Libre and the NWA, and this was filmed at the Orleans Arena. This is a Dave Marquez production, and they ran with Lucha Legends and the NWA. And so I got to see. This was before the titles split from Impact. So the main title at the time that Dave Marquez recognized was the NWA Heritage title. At that point, held by Adam Pearce, and he defended against Nelson Creed, who's a Canadian wrestler from ECCW, which was also an NWA promotion. And they had freaking. Oh God, why am I blanking on his name? He's my favorite. Nick. Oh God, it's killing me. AWA World Champion Nick Bockwinkel. God, why couldn't I think of that? Nick Bockwinkel was there as part of the ceremony, and Pierce wouldn't shake his hand, and so that was a big deal. And I was like, cool, man. And then a few months later, or maybe even a few years later, we ended up going to Arizona to watch wrestling, and again, another Dave Marquez production. They did a show at a small minor league baseball field, and like 120 degrees in the middle of June. Later, I would talk to some of the wrestlers, and they told me that they did not want to take bumps on that mat because it was like 100 degrees. And I was like, holy shit. But yeah, so then Arizona, and those were my big three for the longest time. And then, of course, I went to China when the NWA was, long story short, when Billy Corgan got control of the NWA, the first thing he did was started working with Dave Marquez, again, longtime friend of mine. And when they started running the NWA angles, everything was happening in Hollywood. Tim Storm came out to Hollywood, was introduced to the Hollywood crowd. All those 10 pounds of gold were being filmed right there at the same place that they were filming the Championship Wrestling from Hollywood in Port Hueneme. So, again, started developing this relationship with Dave Lagana, had a great relationship with Dave Marquez, had a fairly decent relationship with Nick Aldis. We would, chat back and forth a little bit on Twitter. And the news came, hey, we're going to be doing this show in China. Well, hell yeah, this is awesome. And I jokingly said to Dave, man, I wish I could go. And he says, well, go.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, don't you need a passport? Well, go get one. Well, I already had the passport. Go get a visa. It's $120. You only have to renew it every 10 years. Oh, okay. Well, I got a visa. Okay. Then plane tickets. And they helped me out with the hotel. One of the coolest things is because this was like a paid show, right? This was like the local promoter kind of paid for everything.
Right.
And, I wish I had pictures handy to show you, but like they basically paid for most of my meals while I was there. And so I'm sitting there at this restaurant. I'll get to the restaurant. Basically, we fly in, we go to the hotel. The first night I'm just crashed because it's a 16-hour flight, and I slept for maybe 3 of those 16 hours. So I just crashed that first day we were there. The next night we go out to eat, and it's the Simon Inoki's translator, then the local promoter, and then like 6 of us Americans. So it was like Dave Marquez, Logan Chetwick, who was like the camera operator, and then like Heather Monroe, Nick Bogano, who was the head referee, Eric Watts, and myself. And so we all get taken out to this pizza place. Well, the first thing they do is they bring up cars. I'm like, okay, everyone jump in the cars. So I jump in. All the wrestlers stick together, right?
Right.
The only car left is with not Simon, but the interpreter and the local promoter. I'm like, oh, great. I'm totally losing my kidneys tonight. So not knowing any bit of Mandarin or Chinese language or Japanese, because the interpreter also spoke Japanese, I'm just sitting in the car, and they know me as the journalist from America. They thought I wrote for Pro Wrestling Illustrated. That's probably why I volunteered to pay for my food. But so as I'm there, they're like, oh, you like pizza? I was like, well, fuck yeah, I like pizza. If you're going to kidnap me, that's the best way to do it. So I jump in the car with them. We all drive to this pizza place, and it wasn't like this huge. Like if I was going to impress you, I'd take you to a very nice Italian place, right?
Right.
It wasn't a hole in a wall, but it wasn't like something huge and fancy. It's just like a regular pizza place, and we were the only ones in there, and we sit down, and they just start serving food, like food. They bring us Coors Light, or not Coors, excuse me, Coronas, and later Bud Light, and we're just drinking and eating, and this is where I learned something because I grew up in a Catholic house where if you didn't clean your plate, you were an awful human being because there's people starving in China, so you better eat. But in China, if you clean your plate, you're telling your host, "I want
You
more."
want more.
So I'm eating, and Dave looks over at me and goes, "Stop eating." And I go, "Oh," like I thought I did something wrong. He goes, "Is everything okay?" He's like, "They're going to keep putting food on your plate until you stop eating the food." And I had eaten a ton. Like, they brought out salad. I ate salad. They brought out fruit.
I
So
eat fruit.
this fruit, talking like pineapples and strawberries and some sort of melon. And it had like this white tipped stuff. I thought it was like a frosting. Like I was like, "Oh, sweet." No, that was mayonnaise, my friend.
What? Huh?
Yeah.
Come again?
Yeah. And so so that was awful. And I only had a piece of that. They brought fish. And I said, "Oh, what kind of fish is this?" And the interpreter looked at me. He's like, "Oh, yeah, fish. You like fish." I don't really like fish, but I ate it to be, respectful. Then they bring out chicken wings. Now you're in my wheelhouse. And I ate like all of the chicken wings. The pizza wasn't just like mozzarella. They also had like cheddar on it. I don't care. It was delicious. And they keep pouring beers and I keep drinking them. And I'm getting drunk and I'm full and I'm, "Hey, stop eating." I'm like, "Oh, okay, no problem." Like the six of us were there and they were just, they flipped the bill. And oddly enough, they didn't drive us home. We had to walk back to the hotel, which was fine. But like walking down the streets in China, drunk, full, and having a good time.
There you go. You can't ask for a better trip than that, can you?
No, and breakfast was included in the hotel, so we'd go in and like it was everything you'd imagine. I stuck to the scrambled eggs and stir fry. The vegetables, the lo mein, it was good. It was amazing. The hotel like food was great, but there's a lot of stuff I would not eat.
Yeah. If it's got vegetables with it, I don't mess with it. I'm not a I'm a meat and potatoes guy. Potatoes is as far as I go with vegetables. My
Yeah.
mom was 5 foot tall and told me the lie all my life that if you want to grow up big and strong, you need to eat your vegetables. I'm not small and I ain't weak, so
So in my suitcase too, because like Dave was telling me stories of like the first time he went out there that they were literally eating monkey brain. So I'm like, all right, I have trail mix and beef jerky, and when I go to my room, I got food. And luckily, I didn't have to tap into that. But I'm also really awful at taking care of myself when I'm on the road. So like, and if we'll talk about this later, but like, I go on binges where I won't eat.
yeah.
So like when they offered me food, like I would take it, but if no one offered, like I didn't go get dinner on a night that I was there. And like they'd offer us McDonald's, and the first night I was like, "McDonald's, I don't want McDonald's," so I didn't eat. The next day I was like, "Yeah, McDonald's sounds great." But yeah, and like I said, I didn't pay for any food that when I was there, so that's cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking some time out of your day for me. I know that you've got a busy couple of weeks coming up, so I don't want to keep you much longer.
Sure, man.
It's been a blast talking with you today, and I thank everyone for tuning in and watching this. And stay tuned for more. I'm going to line up more of these because, well, I like doing it.
It was a lot of fun, man. I appreciate it. Anytime.
Appreciate you.